In this lab, we're going to be learning how to perform and interpret the 1 repetition max on the bench press. So our objectives here for this lab is to obviously understand what the 1RM is, right? So our example for the 1RM is going to be on the bench press. We also want to understand why we would want to use a 1RM. And then again, specifically on a bench press. Because remember, you could do 1RM on really any modality. And then obviously what we want to do also is to demonstrate the proper techniques when we're performing a 1RM on the bench press, and then the proper procedures for conducting the 1RM on the bench press. It's just not as simply as throwing on the weight, okay, let's see how much you can lift, right? There are certain steps that we have to follow. And then finally, once we have the 1RM, what do we do with it? So it is important to be able to interpret those results. So the 1RM, well, strength, right? We know that's obviously has to do with strength. Well, what is strength? Well, we can define that as the most amount of weight that can be lifted by a muscle or a group of muscles in 1 repetition, 1 lift. And that's one of our 5 components of fitness. Y'all remember the 5 components of fitness? What are they? Well, we have cardiovascular endurance, we have flexibility, we've got body composition. Muscular endurance, that's when you're doing repeated bouts against a force. And so something like this would be at least 12. They typically say 15 to 20 reps is muscular endurance. And then finally, we have muscular strength. Now, do you know why strength is included in these 5 components? If your client asks, why is muscular strength so important? What does it have to do with my health? What would you tell her? You should be able to tell her more than just performance-related benefits. What about things like being able to complete daily tasks, like, carrying the groceries in, being able to pick up and play with the kids, the grandkids, changing a car tire, things like these, your activities of daily living. And don't forget other benefits, such as related incidents that have to do physiologically, like low blood sugar. We find that with resistance training and strength is beneficial. People who engage in strength training typically have lower incidence of low back pain. So there are other factors as well. Now, the most common measure of strength is the 1RM, and we typically think of the bench press. We have to remember, though, that the bench press is a measure of upper body strength. And even though it's, only across the chest, shoulder, and triceps, we can only identify it for that targeted muscle group. So be sure to understand that if you want to measure strength on a different body part, you'll have to find a protocol that will serve your needs. And to add to that, we also have to be careful of the equipment we're using. For example, most 1RM protocols require the use of free weights. But if you decide to use a machine or dumbbells or some other modality, then interpreting results from published norms will have to be done with caution. And you also want to remember that if your client is not used to lifting heavy weight, you have other options, such as multiple RM protocols. Some muscular endurance protocols, can also predict 1 repetition max, so that could be an option. But now remember, since the 1RM is considered the gold standard, then the best results will happen if you allow your client to do several familiarization trials over a few weeks before actually conducting the 1RM. So this gets them a chance to be used to it, and also gives them a chance to kind of get an idea of how much weight they might be able to lift in that 1RM. So today we're going to be learning the ACSM protocol for the 1RM on the bench press. And as we just mentioned, the 1RM is the maximum amount of weight that one can lift for 1 repetition, and typically uses free weight. Now, we know a lift like this is considered dynamic constant external resistance, or some used to call it isotonic muscle strength. Since that's the amount of weight that we place against the muscles, it doesn't change throughout the lift. So gravity is pulling it on the same as in the starting position, it's pulling on the same all throughout the range of motion through to the ending position. Now, where this lab focuses on the bench press as an indicator of upper body strength, again, you must remember the 1RM can be used with any large muscle groups or multi-joint lifts. Now, since ACSM has published norms, the results we get back can be compared and used to create an exercise prescription and or track the progress of our clients. Now, the goal of this test is to lift as much weight as possible in one successful repetition. Now, if you have a client who has never lifted or has rarely lifted, then it's best to provide them with a few submaximal familiarization trials across several days just prior to the 1RM. Okay, just reiterating what I said earlier. It's pretty important. And again, this gives them and you an idea of their perceived 1RM, which we're going to need prior to conducting the actual test. So the standard equipment that's used for the 1RM bench press is a free weight using a bench. Whenever possible, this should be used since this is how the norms were developed. Now, I've seen some use chest press machines, but I would highly caution it if making normative comparisons for your client. Again, norms were not developed using these, and since most of these machines use cables with elliptical pulleys, the weight lifted could be different than what they would lift on a free weight. Now, if your goal is to track progress and not necessarily compare your client with norms, then you could feel more comfortable using a chest press. Now, we're also going to be using the ACSM protocol like I just mentioned, so we need to know the standardized procedure for warming up. That's very important. You don't just throw the weight on the bar and say, okay, let's go. There's a protocol that we have for that, so I'm going to show you what that is. Now, prior to performing really any exertional test, even resistance training, it's best to provide a general warm-up and then some stretching of the targeted muscles. So for the general warm-up, the clients can simply walk on a treadmill at a self-selected pace for at least 2.5 miles per hour. And that gives their whole body temperature a chance to increase, gets the blood flowing and so forth throughout all the muscles. Then after that, they can perform stretches for the shoulder, chest, and triceps. So these are your targeted stretches. Now, during this time, you can ask them what they perceive their 1RM to be. For example, I may have a client who thinks he can lift 175 pounds. I need this information because the ACSM protocol requires 2 specific warm-ups based on repetitions at 40 to 60% of perceived max, and then again at 70 to 80% of perceived max. So the first set requires a client to lift 5 to 10 repetitions at 40 to 60% of their perceived max. And this 40 to 60%, that's considered light to moderate effort. So we got to figure that out. So, all right, you think you can lift 175? Let's multiply that by 40%. Well, we need to change the 40% to a decimal, so it goes to 0.4. So 175 times 0.4 is 70 pounds. Then 175 times 0.6, 60%, is 105 pounds. In this case, I would discuss with my client what weight between 70 and 105 pounds would he like to use for that first warm-up set. Okay, so then we decide that. Put the weight on the bar. Boom. All right. Now that I'm going to have my client lie supine on the bench, and their head, or his head, his shoulders, his hips, are going to be supported firmly on the bench, and the feet are going to be resting flat at shoulder width, but on the floor. Okay. Be sure to let them know that they should not arch their back, they should not lift their heads off the bench, they should not bounce the bar off their chest. They need to have good form. And then when gripping the bar, their hand should be slightly wider than shoulder width grip. We also know the importance of having a spotter for safety reasons. When administering the 1RM bench press test, I'm going to help my client lift the bar off of the rack and then position it so that the bar is just right across the eyebrow level. Now I'm going to let go of the bar, and my client's going to lower the bar to the chest, then push up through full range of motion. So that's 1 rep. And remember, since this is the first warm-up, he's going to do that for 5 to 10 repetitions. Their choice, but at least 5 and then no more than 10. And then I want to make sure that this person, my client, is exhaling as he pushes, right? So as the effort is being made, he exhales. This is with any exercise. We want to avoid that Valsalva maneuver. After the 5 to 10 reps, he now gets a 1 to 3 minute rest. The next warm-up set requires 60 to 80% of perceived max, and that's considered moderate to hard effort. Well, we already calculated 60%, right? That was 105 pounds, so we need to calculate 80%. So 175 times 0.8, it comes out to 140 pounds. So now we decide how much weight between 105 and 140 pounds he wants to use for the second warm-up set. We place that on the bar, and again, after 1 to 3 minute rest, after that first warm-up set, he now does 3 to 5 reps for the second warm-up set. Okay? So now the warm-ups are done. He gets another 1 to 3 minute rest. And during that time, we're going to place the perceived max, which is 175 pounds on the bar, and my client makes his first attempt. If he cannot successfully lift the weight, then we need to remove some for the next attempt. If he can successfully lift the weight, then we need to add some for the next attempt. So ACSM suggests that we add around 5 to 45 pounds, depending on the ease with which the previous rep was made. Okay, so if it was rather difficult, then you probably don't want to add any more than 5 pounds. If it was super duper easy, oh man, I could lift a whole lot more than this, then hey, you can add up to 45 pounds. It just depends. You and your client need to talk about that. Now, after each 1RM attempt, they get 3 to 5 minutes rest. So no fewer than 3 minutes, no more than 5 minutes. These should be maximal effort so they get full recovery. The last successful lift is considered the 1RM. So if on the last attempt, if they don't maintain form, if they're not extending to full range of motion, if they're not going down all the way, or if they're doing something that, or even if they decide to, oh, that's it, I'm done, then that terminates the test. Okay. So then the weight lifted is your score, or the ratio of the weight lifted divided by the body weight. Well, the ratio is the weight lifted by the body weight, so you divide those two. Then that can be used to assess my client's performance. Now, after recording the values, the most common practice is to compare them with a normative set of data. So remember, when you're doing this, to be sure, normative data is appropriate to age, sex, and ethnicity if possible. If you're a middle-aged adult, it's not wise to compare your values with an elderly person, right? It doesn't make any sense. This table here, what you see are norms from the ACSM guidelines for testing and prescription. Okay, so let's check out a demonstration here. The first thing we'll do is have our client walk on the treadmill at about 2.5 miles per hour, self-selected pace. After which they'll perform some targeted stretches. And so these stretches should target the chest, the shoulder, the triceps. Get ready for those lifts. So let's calculate Jesse's warm-up weight. His perceived max is 150 pounds, so we multiply that by 40%, which is 60 pounds. We also multiply that by 60%, which is 90 pounds. So his first set's going to be anywhere between 60 and 90 pounds. We'll also calculate the 80%, so his perceived max times 0.8 is 120 pounds. And that will be for his second set between 90 and 120. Notice Jesse's form. His head, back, and buttocks are flat on the bench. His feet flat on the floor. His grip is going to be shoulder width, just wide of the shoulders. Now that he understands the proper positioning on the bench, we'll go ahead and place his first warm-up weight. He's elected to go with the 60 pounds. We know the bar is 45 pounds, so we just need to add the extra on the plates, and we'll set that on there. And now it's time for the first warm-up set. Always remember, have that spotter, so the spotter will help client lift the bar off the rack. And notice when Jesse is doing his repetitions, he's not doing them ballistically. He's lowering the bar slowly to his chest and coming back up. They're not bouncing off the chest. His back, his head, and his buttocks are flat on the bench, as well as his feet. And he's elected to do 7 reps. So remember, it's between 5 and 10 reps. And then the spotter helps rack the bar once he's finished. After that first warm-up set, you get 1 to 3 minutes of rest, and at this time we'll go ahead and set the weights for the second warm-up set. Jesse has elected to go with the 60% right at the lower limit for 90 pounds, so we'll place those on the bar. So after our 1 to 3 minute rest, it's time for our second warm-up set, and you can see as Jesse is progressing with his lifts, beautiful form. He's not bouncing anything, he's not arching anything, so he has decided to take 4 repetitions in this one. One thing you will notice here that we have forgotten to use the collars. So collars is a safety precaution. We should be using those. I do encourage everybody to use those whenever you're using free weights, because even with a spotter, that can be a little bit dangerous. Now that the second warm-up set is concluded, we get another 1 to 3 minute rest. And so during that time, we'll go ahead and place the weights onto the bar. In this case, Jesse's perceived max is 150 pounds. So again, remember the bar weighs 45 pounds. Whatever bar you may be using, you just need to make sure that the proper weight is being used in account with the bar. So different bars have different sizes. And then Jesse will get ready for his first 1RM attempt. But during that 1 to 3 minute rest, it's a good idea to make sure your client is doing some stretching in between those attempts. This now marks Jesse's first 1 repetition max attempt. You can see, again, using good form, nothing is ballistic. He is allowing the bar to touch his chest before it rises again. Notice the spotter is not handling the bar while the client is lifting. And then once the attempt is finished, then the spotter helps rack the bar. After that first attempt now, it was successful, and Jesse has decided he can make another attempt. Your client gets 3 to 5 minutes rest, and so again, during that time, you can adjust the weight. And so in this case, he's decided to go with the minimum and add about 5 pounds. Remember, ACSM says you want to add increments no less than 5 pounds, but no more than 45 pounds. So during the 3 to 5 minute rest time as well, be sure to, again, please encourage your clients to make sure that they continue to stretch and to move around and walk around, not just sit down. Now that 3 to 5 minutes have passed, Jesse is ready for his second attempt. So same as all the others, gets into the correct position. The spotter helps raise the bar. Again, Jesse lowers the bar to the chest, doesn't let it bounce, and he attempts to push it up. He is not able to push the bar up, so the spotter sees that. The spotter then grabs the bar and helps rack it so that the client stays safe. So Jesse's last successful attempt was 150 pounds. So we can write that here, that's his raw score. And then Jesse weighs 170 pounds, so that's his body weight. The weight lifted divided by the body weight gives us a ratio of 0.88. We know that Jesse is 39 years old. We can scroll down to find his ratio of 0.88 and then go to the left, and we see he is in the fair category. From here, you can then create exercise prescriptions for his resistance training, as well as track his progress. So now we know what the run repetition max for the bench press is, and we know why it's important to conduct this test through this tutorial, and we understand the proper techniques that need to be used and the procedures for conducting it. Just remember to use those collars. And then, of course, how to evaluate results. In this case, we just looked at a table from norms to help us get an idea of what we can do for Jesse in future exercise prescriptions.